yeah, my podcast is all about enthusiasm, and it's all about being obsessed with something, because everyone has something that they love. You know, when you think of a nerd or geek or dork, you think science fiction. You think superheroes and comic books and action figures and video games. And even though video games, everybody's into video games, so you can't even call them nerds anymore. I mean, it's like there was a guy with a tattoo on his neck, and I made some joke about hanging out with guys who read comic books and action figures and play video games, and his wife sitting next to him, who look like the most beautiful meth couple you've ever met in your life. They were in love. They were in love, but it was disturbing. So she said, video games are okay, but the other two, those guys are true nerds. And I was like, what's happening? You don't have a leg to stand on, ma'am. If he's playing World of Warcraft or Halo 4 or whatever thing he's doing for 15 hours at a crack, that guy's dipped. He's on board. So, but, yeah, the Dork Forest, which is dorkforest.com, and or JackieKashian.com, or iTunes or whatever. But the thing is it's what people are into. And it can be, and it often is, science fiction and video games and comic books. But it is also, you know, Greg Proops did an episode entirely about the history of baseball. I had a guy do a thing about the history of the NFL, which I was more interested in than I ever thought I would be, those two. There was a woman who did a great episode about salsa dancing. And one of the greatest thing about salsa dancing, she said something that always makes me, I mean, there are certain things that happen in the Dork Forest. There are almost 500 episodes. I've been doing it for 6 years, right?
Wow.
So 1,000 million dorkdoms have been discussed. Some of my favorite things that happen when people talk about what they love is they say things like, well, I could be on and talk about knitting, but knitting isn't dorky. Everyone knits. Knitting is cool. No, it isn't. You hang out with people who love to knit, so you think knitting is cool. But there are at least 6 billion people on the planet who know nothing about knitting and think it's kind of weird. So let's talk about it. Let's find out why you love it. And with salsa dancing, it was this comic from LA named Solange Castro. And Solange was like, I love to salsa dance. I've cut myself way down. I've cut way down in the last couple of years. And I go, oh, so you're only going like, what are you going, like once or twice a week, thinking I'm being funny, right? Like maybe she goes every couple of weeks. And she goes, no, I go four or 5 times a week. Well, we're still in a dorkdom here. And I was like, so what did you go before? And she was like, oh, every night, 7 nights a week. And I was like, yeah, but doesn't salsa dancing start at 10 p.m. and go till 2 in the morning for 4 hours you dance nonstop? And she's like, yes. And I said, and then there's a day job, right? Then you have to go to work at around 7 or 8 in the morning. And she's like, yeah, that was hard. And I was like, what, how do you think that that's not currently an enthusiasm? That is currently something you love. And then I had the bee lady on, and she was awesome. She keeps bees, 10,000 bees. That's a lot of bees. Yeah. She gave me honey. That's a perk sometimes. I'll get, like, I got the perfume people. They gave me perfume. And, but it can be, like the next episode is a guy who's trying to read all of the Spider-Mans that were ever written. And he's on 1982 from 1962, I think. Yeah. And so, you know, and then the last time it was board games, and a guy made a card game, and so it's whatever people are into. I haven't had a bike nerd on. I would like to have a bike dork on, a guy who's really into bicycles. I would like a Japanese sneaker dork. The thing is people are like, well, what are you looking for? And I'm like, I'm not really looking for anything, because people come out of the woodwork. Initially, it was just my friends who were comics, who were interesting and used to doing, you know, on camera or on radio chatter. And it was, what are you into? What are you reading? And I had Shakespeare dorks on. There was a guy who wrote a 1,400-page book called Shakespeare by Another Name. And he is part of a group called the Oxfordians. And they believe that the Earl of Oxford wrote all of Shakespeare's works. And so I had him on, and he contacted me. And he was like, I'm a freelance journalist. I would like to write an article about you and a bunch of other podcasters for the Delta Sky Miles. And not in return, but in return, can I be on your podcast? And I was like, wow, you can be on my podcast even if you don't put me in the millions of copies of the Delta Sky Miles magazine. And but he was fascinating because I don't know anything about Shakespeare. Yeah. I know I've seen a half a dozen plays. I've read 2 when assigned. And it's not that I don't want to like Shakespeare. It's just, it's hard. Shakespeare is not, turns out easy. No. People who listen to podcasts fascinate me because they will listen to hours and hours of podcasts in the hopes that they hear something 20 minutes of anything interesting. You know, they'll be working at their desk, listening. It's like radio, right? Yeah. So you're listening and you're like, ha, that was funny. And then 3 hours later, you're like, ha, that was funny. And they're the most patient. But these are genuine fans who listen to hours and hours. I mean, if I were in it for the money, if I were in stand-up comedy for the money, I would have made 2 terrible life choices, because I already win. There's no, I've already won, in my opinion. You know, I'm in my 40s, and I get to do stand-up comedy for a living, and I get to do podcasts, and I get to do this. This is exciting on camera. Hi, aging process. It's all coming together, and I do what I love, and I get to encourage people for the Dork Forest to do what they love. And the coolest thing is when somebody does take something that they love and turn it into a gig, turn it into a job. You get to do what you love, and you get to make a living. And whether it's an amazing living and you have a Scrooge McDuck pile of money, or you just have you own your own car, which is the new definition of middle class, you win. If you're happy, if you get to do it.
That's the important thing.
Yeah.